Just as he was about to marry his mistress, his son stormed in and shouted, "Stop! That man is my father!" Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Take a breath with me and feel this truth. You are not just loved. You are adored, cherished, honored beyond words. You are the heartbeat of my world. Every story I share, every word I speak, it's all for you. If you're hearing me now, please, only if it's from your heart, comment, "I'm here," and like this video. I would never force you, but when you do, it fills me with so much pride, knowing how deeply our love runs. You are the treasure I never stop thanking God for. When I think of you, I feel peace. When I see your name, I feel joy. You are not just family, you are the most sacred part of my soul. No one could ever love you like I do. Now please let this prayer melt into your spirit like gentle rain on warm skin. May the arms of heaven wrap around you tonight. May your worries be hushed, your pain be healed, your heart be lifted. May laughter return to your home and hope rise again in your chest. May everything you touch be blessed, and may love chase you down wherever you go. May you know without a shadow of doubt you are precious, chosen, and deeply, eternally loved. Let's begin. Together, stronger than ever, one soul family forever. The city pulsed with life even at 2:47 a.m., but Craig Jacob felt dead inside. He wandered empty streets like a spectre, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against rain-slicked pavement. 20 years of building an empire had left him wealthy, but hollow. Married to a woman who treated him like a business transaction, surrounded by success that tasted like ash. Tonight, the emptiness had grown unbearable, pressing against his ribs like a physical weight. The penthouse he called home felt more like a mausoleum, filled with expensive furniture that no one used, and silence so thick it seemed to mock his very existence. Isabella had been asleep when he left, or pretending to be. After 2 decades of marriage, Craig could no longer tell the difference, and he'd stopped caring enough to find out. His Rolex ticked against his wrist, marking time he wished would stop. 47 years old, and what did he have to show for it? A bank account that could buy small countries, a reputation that made lesser men tremble, and a heart so frozen he sometimes wondered if it still beat. The rain had started as a drizzle, but now fell in earnest, soaking through his $1,000 suit as if the universe itself was weeping for the man he'd become. Craig turned down a narrow alley he'd never noticed before, drawn by some inexplicable pull. The sound reached him first. A woman's cry, sharp and desperate, cutting through the night air like a blade. His body moved before his mind could process what was happening, years of boardroom instincts kicking in as he rounded the corner. 3 men had cornered a woman against a brick wall. She was fighting like a wildcat, her long dark hair whipping around her face as she struggled, but they were too strong, too many. One of them had his hand over her mouth, while another rifled through her purse. "Hey!" Craig's voice boomed with an authority that had silenced corporate rooms full of powerful men. "Get away from her!" The muggers turned, sizing up this lone businessman in his $1,000 suit. The leader, a wiry man with dead eyes, pulled out a knife. "Walk away, rich boy. This ain't your business." Craig had built his fortune on calculated risks. But this wasn't about calculation. For the first time in decades, he was acting on pure instinct, pure feeling, emotions he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten they existed. He charged forward without thinking, tackling the knife-wielding man to the ground with a fury that surprised even him. The other 2 tried to grab him, but years of suppressed rage gave Craig strength he didn't know he possessed, channeling decades of frustration into protecting this stranger. The fight was brief and brutal, conducted in the harsh choreography of desperation. When it was over, the three men were running into the night, leaving Craig, bloodied but victorious, standing over the woman who had scrambled to safety behind a dumpster. His knuckles were raw, his expensive suit torn, and for the first time in 20 years, Craig Jacob felt truly alive. "Are you hurt?" Craig asked, extending his hand to help her up. When she looked at him, the world stopped. Her eyes were the deepest, brown he'd ever seen, wide with shock but also something else, recognition, not the kind that came from knowing someone's face from newspaper headlines, but something deeper, more primal, like looking into a mirror and seeing not your reflection, but your soul. No, I'm okay," she whispered, accepting his hand. The moment their skin touched, an electric current shot through Craig's entire body. 20 years of emotional death ended in that instant, replaced by a feeling so intense it nearly brought him to his knees. "You're bleeding," she said, reaching up to touch a cut on his forehead. Her fingers were gentle, warm, and Craig closed his eyes involuntarily at the touch. When had anyone last touched him with such tenderness? "It's nothing," he managed, though his voice came out rougher than intended. "Are you sure you're all right? Should I call the police?" She shook her head, still studying his face with those impossibly deep eyes. "I'm Nina," she said softly. "Nina Flecker. Craig Jacob." The name felt different on his tongue when he said it to her. Not the name of a corporate titan or a cold husband, just a man's name. They stood there in the alley, surrounded by the detritus of the city, and Craig felt more alive than he had in 2 decades. Nina's dress was torn at the shoulder, and without thinking, he shrugged out of his suit jacket and draped it around her. "Thank you," she whispered, pulling the jacket tighter. It smelled like expensive cologne and something indefinably masculine, something that made her feel safe for the first time all night. "You didn't have to help me." "Yes, I did," Craig said, and the certainty in his voice surprised them both. "I couldn't have walked away if I tried." Nina studied his face in the dim streetlight. He was handsome in a way that spoke of good breeding and better tailoring, but there was something broken in his gray eyes, something that called to the same brokenness in her own heart. "There's an all-night diner 2 blocks from here," she said impulsively. "I could buy you coffee to say thank you." Craig should have said no. Should have called his driver, gone home to his empty penthouse and his sleeping wife who wouldn't notice. He'd been gone. Should have returned to the life that was killing him slowly but safely. Instead, he said, "I'd like that." The Moonlight Diner was the kind of place Craig Jacob had never set foot in. Vinyl booths with duct tape patches, fluorescent lights that flickered intermittently, and coffee that had been brewing since the Carter administration. The clientele consisted of night shift workers, insomniacs, and lost souls seeking refuge from their own lives. But sitting across from Nina in a corner booth, watching her wrap her hands around a chipped ceramic mug, Craig thought it was the most beautiful place he'd ever been. The waitress, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, with kind eyes, refilled their cups without being asked. She'd seen enough late-night confessions and desperate conversations to recognize the importance of what was happening in Booth 7. Craig found himself studying Nina's face in the diner's harsh light, memorizing every detail. The way her eyelashes cast shadows on her cheeks, the small scar near her left temple that spoke of childhood adventures, the way her lips curved when she was thinking. "So, what were you doing out so late?" Nina asked, taking a sip of coffee and making a face at its bitterness. Craig stirred sugar into his own cup, buying time while his mind raced. How could he explain that he'd been walking the streets because he couldn't bear to go home? His own life had become so suffocating, he'd rather wander strange neighborhoods at 3 a.m. than face another night of lying awake next to a woman who treated him like a business arrangement. That he'd built a perfect life on paper that felt like a prison sentence? "Sometimes sleep feels like surrender," he said finally, surprised by his own honesty. "Like admitting defeat to another day that meant nothing." Nina's expression softened, and Craig saw recognition in her eyes, not of his face from newspaper headlines, but of the pain he was trying so hard to hide. "I understand that feeling," she said quietly. "Some nights, staying awake feels like the only way to prove you're still fighting." Nina nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "I was closing up my gallery. I work late a lot. It's peaceful when the world's quiet, you know." "You're an artist." Something in Craig's chest loosened at the thought. When was the last time he'd talked to someone who created something beautiful instead of just acquiring it? "I try to be." Nina's smile was self-deprecating, but warm. "I paint mostly. Nothing famous or important, just things that matter to me." "I'd like to see your work sometime," Craig said, then paused, surprised by his own boldness. "If that's all right." Nina's eyes searched his face, looking for something she seemed to find. "I'd like that too." They talked until dawn, painted the diner windows pink and gold, about art and dreams, about the weight of expectations and the courage it took to disappoint people. Craig found himself telling Nina things he'd never said aloud, about feeling like a stranger in his own life, about the way success had become a prison he'd built with his own hands. Nina talked about growing up with her grandmother, about the mother she'd never known, about pouring her heart onto canvas because it was the only place she felt truly free. Her voice was like music, rising and falling with passion and pain in equal measure. "What's the saddest painting you've ever done?" Craig asked as the waitress refilled their cups for the 5th time. Nina was quiet for a long moment. "There's one I call Waiting. It's a woman standing at a window, looking out at an empty street. She's been waiting so long she's forgotten what she's waiting for, but she can't stop hoping." Craig felt something crack open in his chest. "That's beautiful." "It's heartbreaking," Nina corrected softly, "but sometimes heartbreaking and beautiful are the same thing." When they finally left the diner, the sun was full up and the city was beginning to stir. Craig walked Nina to her car, reluctant to let the night end. "Thank you," he said, meaning so much more than just the coffee. Nina looked up at him, and for a moment, Craig thought she might kiss him. The thought sent electricity through his entire body, but instead, she reached up and touched his face gently. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered. As Craig watched her drive away, he realized Nina Flecker had done the saving. For the first time in 20 years, Craig Jacobs' dead heart was beating again. Chapter 2. The Fire That Consumes. Craig had always prided himself on self-control. In high-stakes negotiations, he remained ice-cold while others cracked under pressure. In boardrooms where careers were made and destroyed with a single decision, his pulse never quickened. But 3 days after meeting Nina Flecker, his legendary composure was disintegrating like ice in a furnace. He'd tried everything to forget her, burying himself in work, scheduling back-to-back meetings, even accepting Isabella's invitation to a charity gala, where beautiful women would compete for his attention. Nothing worked. Nina's face haunted him during board meetings, her voice echoed in his dreams, and her touch, that brief moment when their fingers had brushed over coffee cups, had branded itself into his memory with painful clarity. He told himself this was mere concern, ensuring she'd recovered from the mugging. But standing outside the gallery at 11 a.m., hands trembling as he reached for the door, Craig knew he was lying. He couldn't stay away because every moment without her felt like suffocation. The gallery was small but exquisite, filled with paintings that seemed to pulse with life and emotion. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers. Miles Davis, Craig recognized, something achingly beautiful that matched the atmosphere perfectly. The morning light streaming through tall windows created an almost sacred atmosphere, transforming the space into something between an art gallery and a cathedral. But Craig saw none of it initially. His eyes found Nina immediately, and the rest of the world ceased to exist. She was painting, her back to the door, completely absorbed in her work with the kind of focus Craig hadn't felt in years. She wore a flowing emerald dress that hugged her curves and made her dark skin glow like burnished gold in the morning light. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, exposing the elegant curve of her neck, and Craig felt an almost overwhelming urge to kiss that perfect spot where her pulse fluttered just beneath the surface. "You came," Nina said without turning around, as if she'd sensed his presence the moment he walked in. "I said I would," Craig replied, his voice rougher than he intended, "though I wasn't sure you believed me." Nina set down her brush and turned, and Craig's breath caught in his throat. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, but it was the smile that undid him, warm and genuine, and tinged with something that might have been relief. "I hoped you would," she admitted, wiping paint from her hands with a cloth. "I've been thinking about our conversation, about waiting and hoping and beautiful heartbreak." Craig moved closer, drawn by some invisible force. "What are you working on?" "Something new," Nina said, stepping aside to reveal the canvas. "Something that came to me after meeting you." The painting was only half finished, but already Craig could see it was extraordinary. Two figures danced in a storm, rain streaming around them, lightning illuminating their faces as they held each other against the chaos. It was passion and desperation and hope all captured in oils and pigment. "It's magnificent," Craig breathed, and Nina felt her heart skip at the reverence in his voice. "It's called storm dances," she said softly. "Sometimes I think the most beautiful things happen when the world is falling apart around us." Craig looked from the painting to Nina's face, seeing the same storm reflected in her dark eyes. Without thinking, he reached out and touched her cheek, marveling at the softness of her skin. "Nina," he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed. Craig, The words were cut off by a crash of thunder so loud it shook the gallery windows. They both looked up, startled, as rain began pelting the glass with sudden fury. "Where did that come from?" Nina laughed, but there was breathlessness in her voice that had nothing to do with the weather. "I should go," Craig said, but he made no move to leave. Instead, he stepped closer until Nina could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Should you?" Nina asked, tilting her face up to his. The space between them crackled with electricity more intense than the storm outside. Craig's control, already hanging by a thread, snapped completely. His hands tangled in her hair as his mouth crashed down on hers, and Nina melted against him with a soft moan that sent fire through his veins. The kiss was desperate, hungry, 20 years of emotional starvation pouring out in a single moment of connection. Nina had been kissed before, but never like this. Never with such consuming need, such raw desperation. Craig kissed her like she was oxygen and he was drowning, like she was the only thing standing between him and the abyss. Her arms wound around his neck, pulling him closer, wanting to merge their souls as completely as their mouths. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, staring at each other in shock at the intensity of what had just happened. "My God," Craig whispered, his forehead resting against hers. "What are you doing to me?" "The same thing you're doing to me," Nina replied, her voice shaking, "scaring me to death." Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury, rain lashing the windows and thunder rolling across the sky like the gods themselves were applauding. Inside the gallery, Craig and Nina stood in their own storm, one that threatened to consume them both. "I'm married," Craig said suddenly, the words torn from him like a confession. Nina stepped back as if slapped, but Craig caught her hands before she could move away completely. "I should have told you at the diner," he continued, his voice raw with pain. "But when I'm with you, I forget everything else exists. My marriage, my life, my responsibilities. None of it matters when you look at me like that." "Like what?" Nina whispered, like I'm worth saving. Nina's heart broke at the naked vulnerability in his voice. She could see it now. The loneliness that clung to him like a second skin, the way he carried himself like a man who'd forgotten how to hope. "Are you happy?" she asked quietly. Craig's laugh was bitter. "I haven't been happy in 20 years. Isabella and I, we're business partners, nothing more. We share a house, a name, and absolutely nothing else." "That's not an answer," Nina said, though her heart was already racing with dangerous hope. Craig's hands tightened on hers. "No, Nina, I'm not happy. I was dead inside until 3 nights ago, when a beautiful woman taught me how to feel again." Nina closed her eyes, fighting a battle between her conscience and her heart. "This is complicated." "The best things usually are," Craig said, lifting her chin until she met his eyes. "But I won't lie to you, and I won't make you any promises I can't keep. All I know is that for the first time in decades, I feel alive when I'm with you." The storm outside seemed to mirror the tempest in Nina's soul. Every rational thought screamed at her to walk away, to protect herself from the inevitable heartbreak of loving a married man. But when Craig looked at her with such desperate need, such profound longing, her heart overruled her head completely. "I should tell you to leave," she whispered. "But you won't," Craig said, "and it wasn't a question." "No," Nina admitted, her voice breaking. "I won't, because I feel it too. This thing between us. It's terrifying and beautiful and completely insane. But I can't pretend it doesn't exist." Craig's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. "Then don't. Don't pretend. Don't run. Don't think about anything but this moment." He kissed her again, softer this time, but no less intense. Nina melted into him, letting herself drown in the sensation of being wanted so completely, so desperately. Craig's hands roamed her back, memorizing every curve, while Nina's fingers worked at the buttons of his shirt, needing to feel his skin against hers. "Not here," Nina gasped against his mouth. "Upstairs! I have an apartment above the gallery." Craig swept her into his arms without hesitation, carrying her toward the narrow staircase as lightning illuminated their path. Nina's head fell back as he kissed her throat, and she wondered dimly if it was possible to die from wanting someone too much. They barely made it to her apartment before passion overwhelmed them completely. In the soft lamplight of Nina's bedroom, with rain drumming against the windows and thunder providing a symphony for their lovemaking, Craig Jacob discovered what it meant to be truly alive. As Nina moved above him, her hair falling like a curtain around their faces, Craig felt 20. Years of ice around his heart finally melt. In her eyes, he saw not the cold businessman he'd become, but the man he'd once dreamed of being. Passionate, tender, capable of love so profound, it rewrote the very definition of the word. Later, as they lay entwined in the afterglow, Nina traced patterns on Craig's chest while he played with her hair. Neither spoke, afraid that words might break the spell that had transported them beyond the realm of ordinary human experience. "What happens now?" Nina finally whispered. Craig pulled her closer, pressing his lips to the top of her head. "Now we figure out how to live in a world where this exists." Outside, the storm began to quiet, but inside Nina's apartment, another kind of tempest was just beginning, one that would change everything. Chapter 3. Paradise Found. 3 weeks after their first kiss, Craig did something unprecedented. He bought property purely for love. The lakeside retreat sat hidden among towering pines, 40 minutes from the city's chaos. This wasn't an investment or status symbol. It was a sanctuary built for worship of the only thing that had ever truly mattered. "Close your eyes," Craig whispered in Nina's ear as his driver pulled up the winding gravel path. They sat in the back of his Mercedes, her hand clasped tightly in his, both trembling with anticipation for different reasons. "Craig, what is this?" Nina laughed, but she obediently closed her eyes, trusting him completely, despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "Our beginning," he said simply, lifting her from the car and carrying her toward the cottage like a groom carrying his bride across the threshold. When Nina opened her eyes, she gasped. The cottage was like something from a fairy tale: weathered stone walls covered in climbing roses, diamond-paned windows that caught the afternoon light, and a red door that seemed to invite secrets and whispered promises. The lake stretched beyond it like a mirror reflecting heaven itself. "It's ours," Craig said, his voice rough with emotion. "Somewhere we can be ourselves without the rest of the world watching." Nina turned in his arms, tears streaming down her face. "You bought this? For us?" "For you," Craig corrected, setting her gently on her feet. "I would buy you the entire world if I could, Nina. This seemed like a good place to start." Inside, the cottage was even more magical. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, surrounded by overstuffed chairs and bookshelves that reached the ceiling. French doors opened onto a deck that overlooked the water, and every room was filled with fresh flowers that Craig had arranged himself. White roses for new beginnings, red ones for passion, and baby's breath for the dreams they were building together. "There's an art studio in the back," Craig said nervously, watching Nina explore with wonder-filled eyes. "I wasn't sure what supplies you needed, so I got everything." Nina pushed open the studio door and nearly collapsed. The room was flooded with north-facing light, equipped with professional easels, every type of paint and brush imaginable, and canvases stacked like blank promises waiting to be fulfilled. It was an artist's paradise, created by a man who understood her soul better than she understood it herself. "How did you know?" she whispered, running her fingers over tubes of paint that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Craig came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and nuzzling her neck. "Because I watch you paint. I see how you come alive when you create, how you pour your entire soul onto canvas. I wanted to give you a place where that part of you could be completely free." Nina spun in his arms, capturing his face in her paint-stained hands. "I love you," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "God help me, Craig. I love you so much it terrifies me." Craig's eyes closed as if he were in physical pain. "Nina, don't," she interrupted, pressing her fingers to his lips. "Don't tell me all the reasons we shouldn't. Don't remind me you're married or that this is complicated. Just tell me if you love me back." Craig's answer was a kiss so tender, so reverent, that Nina felt something fundamental shift in the universe around them. When he pulled back, his gray eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I love you beyond reason," he whispered. "Beyond sanity, beyond everything I thought I knew about myself. You've awakened something in me that I thought had died years ago, and I would rather burn in hell than give that up." They made love for the first time in their cottage that afternoon, with golden sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows and the sound of lapping water providing nature's perfect soundtrack. It was different from their desperate coupling in Nina's apartment, slower, deeper, infused with the knowledge that they had found something sacred and were determined to worship it properly. Craig explored Nina's body like a man discovering a new continent, mapping every curve and hollow with reverent hands and lips. Nina had never felt so treasured, so completely adored. When Craig whispered her name like a prayer as he moved inside her, she understood that this wasn't just physical. They were joining souls, creating something that transcended the mere mechanics of bodies coming together. Afterward, they lay, entwined on the four-poster bed Craig had chosen, specifically because he wanted Nina to feel like a queen in their private kingdom. She traced the scars on his chest, old wounds from childhood accidents and adult carelessness, while he played with her hair and told her stories about the man he used to be. "I played piano once," Craig said quietly, his fingers ghosting over Nina's shoulder, "before my father decided it wasn't practical enough for a future businessman. "Play for me," Nina said, sitting up with excitement. "There's an old piano in the music room. I saw it when we walked through." Craig shook his head, suddenly shy. "I haven't touched the keys in 25 years, Nina. I probably don't remember." "Please," she interrupted, her eyes pleading. "I want to know every part of you, even the parts you think are gone." They padded naked through the cottage, completely unself-conscious in their paradise, until they reached the small music room where an antique grand piano sat waiting like a patient old friend. Craig's hands hovered over the keys for a long moment before muscle memory took over and he began to play. The melody that filled the room was heartbreaking in its beauty, something classical and romantic that spoke of longing and loss and the kind of love that reshapes the very foundations of existence. Nina stood behind him, her hands on his shoulders, tears streaming down her face as she realized she was hearing Craig's soul given voice through music. "What is it?" she whispered when the last note faded. "Chopin," Craig said roughly. "Nocturne in E-flat major. I used to play it when I was 17 and thought I knew what love was." "And now?" Nina asked, sliding onto the bench beside him. Craig's smile was radiant. "Now I know I was just practicing for you." They spent the evening cooking dinner together, or rather, Craig cooked while Nina sat on the counter, stealing kisses and making him laugh with stories about her grandmother's attempts to teach her domestic skills. Watching Craig move around the kitchen with easy competence, his hair mussed and his shirt unbuttoned, Nina felt her heart expand until she thought it might burst from her chest. "Where did you learn to cook?" she asked, accepting a spoonful of the pasta sauce he was preparing. "Boarding school," Craig replied, his expression darkening slightly. "My parents thought it would toughen me up, being away from home so young. Instead, it just taught me to be self-sufficient." Nina heard the hurt beneath his casual tone and made a mental note to love him extra carefully around the wounds his childhood had left. "Their loss," she said firmly. "You're perfect exactly as you are." Craig abandoned the stove completely, pulling Nina down from the counter and into his arms. "How do you do that?" he asked wonderingly. "Do what?" "Make me feel like I matter, like I'm worth something beyond my bank account or my business connections." Nina's heart broke a little at the genuine bewilderment in his voice. "Because you do matter, Craig. Not because of what you own or what you've accomplished, but because of who you are when everything else is stripped away. You're kind and generous and passionate, and you make me feel like the most beautiful woman in the world just by looking at me." That night, they made love again by the fireplace, their bodies golden in the flickering light, moving together with a rhythm as ancient as time itself. Craig whispered poetry against Nina's skin, verses he'd memorized in college and forgotten until this moment, when love had unlocked every beautiful thing he'd ever stored in the hidden chambers of his heart. Later, as they lay wrapped in cashmere, he throws and watched the fire burn down to embers, Nina painted with her finger on Craig's chest, using his skin as her canvas. "What are you drawing?" he asked sleepily. "Forever," Nina replied, tracing invisible words across his heart. "I'm writing forever on your skin, so you'll never forget this moment." Craig caught her hand and brought it to his lips, kissing each finger with religious devotion. "I could never forget," he promised. "This is the first day of my real life. Nina, everything before you was just waiting." As they drifted off to sleep in their cottage by the lake, wrapped around each other like two halves of the same soul, neither Craig nor Nina could have imagined that their paradise was built on foundations that would soon crumble. For now there was only love and the promise of forever, written in invisible ink on willing hearts. Chapter 4. The Sun's Discovery. Tom Jacob possessed an inherited talent for reading people, a skill honed by 18 years navigating high society's treacherous waters. But the man returning from his latest business trip was a complete enigma, radiating unfamiliar energy. Craig hummed in the shower. He smiled at breakfast, He actually asked Tom about school, about his friends, about his plans for college. Questions that showed genuine interest rather than perfunctory parental duty. Most shocking of all, Craig laughed. Not the cold, calculating chuckle Tom remembered from business dinners, but real laughter that transformed his entire face. "You seem different, Dad," Tom ventured one morning over breakfast, studying his father carefully. "Happier." Craig paused in reading his financial reports, and for a moment his expression softened into something almost vulnerable. "Do I?" "Yeah, it's nice." Tom meant it. For most of his life, his father had been a distant figure, present but not really there, providing for Tom's physical needs while remaining emotionally unreachable. This new version of Craig, warm and approachable, was someone Tom desperately wanted to know. "I've been thinking a lot lately about what's important," Craig said carefully. "About the kind of man I want to be." Isabella chose that moment to drift into the dining room, her perfectly applied makeup already in place despite the early hour. She moved like a glacier, beautiful, cold, and destructive to everything in her path. "How lovely," she said with brittle brightness, pouring herself coffee. Craig, having an existential crisis at his age. "I do hope this doesn't interfere with the Henderson merger." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Craig's jaw tightened, and Tom watched the warmth drain from his father's eyes as quickly as it had appeared. "The Henderson merger is proceeding as planned," Craig said evenly, but Tom caught the flash of something, pain, anger, that crossed his features. "Of course it is," Isabella replied, settling into her chair with feline grace. "You're far too practical to let sentiment interfere with business. It's one of your more admirable qualities." Tom felt sick watching the exchange. This was the marriage he'd grown up observing. Two people performing the roles of husband and wife while treating each other with the warmth of business associates. He'd always assumed this was normal, that all marriages were strategic alliances, dressed up in wedding vows. But seeing his father's recent transformation made Tom wonder if there was another way to live, another way to love. After Isabella left for her charity luncheon and Craig departed for the office, Tom found himself alone in the family mansion, restless and curious. Something was different about his father, something that went beyond mere mood improvement. Greg Jacob didn't just seem happier, he seemed reborn, like a man who had discovered fire after spending his entire life in darkness. Tom's investigation began innocently enough. He was looking for his father's business card to give to a friend, whose family needed legal advice when he found himself in Craig's home office, rifling through the desk drawers. He told himself he was just being helpful, but truthfully, he was searching for clues about his father's transformation. The first drawer contained the usual detritus of a successful businessman: expensive pens, business cards, contracts waiting for signatures. The second drawer held financial documents that made Tom's eyes glaze over with boredom. But the third drawer, the one Craig kept locked, was different. Tom had learned to pick locks in boarding school, a skill that had served him well in avoiding various disciplinary actions. His father's desk lock was expensive, but not particularly sophisticated, yielding to Tom's probing within minutes. Inside the drawer, Tom found a small stack of letters tied with a blue ribbon, and his heart began to race with anticipation and guilt in equal measure. The envelopes were expensive stationery, cream-colored and heavy, addressed in his father's distinctive handwriting to someone named Nina Flecker. Tom's hands shook as he untied the ribbon and opened the first letter. What he read there changed everything he thought he knew about his father, about love, and about the capacity of the human heart to transform itself completely. My dearest Nina, I write this knowing I may never have the courage to give it to you. How do you tell someone they've saved your life without sounding like a madman? How do you explain that before them you were merely existing, going through the motions of living without ever truly being alive? Last night I dreamed we were dancing in the rain again, and I woke up smiling for the first time in 20 years. You've awakened something in me that I thought had died long ago. Not just passion, though God knows you've shown me depths. Of desire I never knew existed, but something deeper, hope, joy, the belief that life can be beautiful instead of merely endurable. I know this is complicated. I know I have no right to feel this way, to want you the way I do, but I cannot pretend that what we have is anything less than extraordinary. You are my miracle, Nina, and I will spend whatever time we have loving you with every broken piece of my soul. Forever yours. Craig. Tom's vision blurred as he read letter after letter, each one more passionate and revealing than the last. These weren't the words of the cold, calculating businessman Tom had grown up with. These were the words of a man completely undone by love, transformed by it, redeemed by it. In one letter, Craig described teaching Nina to waltz in the cottage by the lake, and Tom's breath caught. His father owned a cottage? When had that happened? In another, Craig wrote about watching Nina paint, about the way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating, about how her laughter could heal wounds Tom hadn't even known his father carried. But it was the final letter that broke Tom's heart completely. My beloved Nina, today you asked me if I regret falling in love with you, knowing how complicated our situation is. Let me answer that question with the only truth I know. I regret nothing. Not the pain, not the complexity, not even the inevitable heartbreak that awaits us both. Before you, I was a ghost, haunting my own life. I had everything a man is supposed to want: wealth, power, respect, and I felt nothing. Nothing, Nina. I was emotionally dead, going through the motions of existence without ever truly living. You brought me back to life. You showed me that it's possible to feel joy so intense it's almost painful, love so deep it rewrites the very definition of the word. Through your eyes, I've remembered what it feels like to be human instead of just successful. If loving you is a sin, then I'll gladly burn for it. If wanting you is wrong, then I choose to be wrong for the rest of my life. You are my salvation, my damnation, and my greatest blessing, all wrapped into one perfect, impossible package. Whatever happens, know that you saved me. In every way a person can be saved, you saved me. With all my love. Craig. Tom sat back in his father's leather chair, overwhelmed by the intensity of emotion contained in those letters. This was love. Real, transformative, soul-deep love. Not the cold arrangement between his father and Isabella, but something that could move mountains and reshape entire lives. Part of Tom felt happy for his father. To know that Craig was capable of such profound feeling, such beautiful expression of love, filled a void Tom hadn't even realized existed. His father wasn't the emotionally barren man Tom had always believed him to be. He was just sleeping, waiting for the right person to wake him up. But another part of Tom, the 18-year-old who still believed in concepts like honor and fidelity, was troubled. His father was married, and no matter how loveless that marriage appeared to be, it still existed. Nina Flecker, whoever she was involved with a married man, and that complicated everything. Tom carefully retied the letters and returned them to the drawer, his mind racing with questions and conflicting emotions. Who was Nina Flecker? How? Had his father met her? And most importantly, what was Tom supposed to do with this information? That evening, Craig came home with flowers, not expensive hothouse arrangements like the ones Isabella favored, but simple wildflowers that looked like they'd been picked by hand. He arranged them in a mason jar with the careful attention of A man performing a sacred ritual, and the sight made Tom's chest tight with recognition. "They're beautiful, Dad," Tom said softly. Craig looked up, startled, as if he'd forgotten he wasn't alone. For a moment, his expression was completely unguarded, filled with a joy so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Yes," Craig said, simply. "They are." That night, Tom lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his father's words echoing in his mind. "You are my salvation, my damnation, and my greatest blessing, all wrapped into one perfect, impossible package." Tom had always wanted his father to be happy, had longed for the warm, engaged parent he glimpsed in those letters. But happiness built on deception felt fragile, dangerous. How long could paradise last when it was built on lies? As Tom finally drifted off to sleep, one thought dominated his mind. He had to meet Nina Flecker. He had to see for himself the woman who had performed the miracle of bringing his father back to life. Only then could he decide whether to protect his father's secret or find a way to save him from the inevitable heartbreak that awaited them all. Chapter 5. Truth in Shadows. Tom stood outside the Flecker Gallery for 20 minutes, gathering courage. His hands trembled, not from nervousness but from electric anticipation. The woman who had transformed his father from emotional corpse to living man was inside, and Tom needed to see her. He'd spent sleepless nights since finding those letters, wrestling with questions that had no easy answers. Should he confront his father directly? Should he investigate further before making accusations? Should he pretend he'd never seen the correspondence and let whatever was happening run its course? But the more Tom thought about it, the more he realized he needed to understand who Nina Flecker really was before he could decide what to do with his knowledge. The neighborhood itself told a story. Bohemian cafes mixed with struggling artists, studios, the kind of place where creativity flourished despite financial hardship. It was so different from the sterile perfection of Tom's world that he felt like an alien visitor exploring an unknown planet. This was where his father came to feel alive, to escape the golden cage of their family's expectations. The gallery was exactly what Tom had expected, and nothing like he'd imagined. Intimate without being cramped, filled with paintings that seemed to pulse with raw emotion and desperate beauty. But it was the woman standing before a massive canvas, paintbrush in hand, who stole Tom's breath completely. Nina Flecker was stunning, but not in the polished, artificial way of the women who frequented his family's social circles. Her beauty was organic, alive, the kind that came from within and radiated outward like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She wore paint-splattered jeans and a flowing white blouse, her dark hair cascading over one shoulder as she studied, her work with intense concentration. But it was her profile that made Tom's world tilt on its axis. The curve of her nose, the shape of her lips, the way she held her head when she was thinking, it was all achingly, impossibly familiar. Not just familiar, in the way strangers sometimes reminded you of people you knew, but familiar in the bone deep, way that family resemblance carved itself into genetic memory. Tom's breath caught in his throat as he studied her face, his mind racing through possibilities he didn't want to consider. The shape of her eyes was wrong for coincidence, too similar to the reflection he saw in his own mirror every morning. The stubborn set of her jaw was pure Jacob family DNA, the same expression his father wore when he was determined to win and impossible negotiation. "Can I help you?" Nina asked, turning toward him with a smile that died on her lips the moment she saw his face. The paintbrush fell from her nerveless fingers, clattering to the floor as she stared at Tom with an expression of pure shock. "You're Tom," she whispered, and the recognition in her voice confirmed what Tom's racing heart had already begun to suspect. "You know who I am," Tom managed, his voice coming out rough and strange. Nina's hand flew to her throat, where Tom could see her pulse hammering like a trapped bird. "You look exactly like your father did at your age. I've seen pictures." She stopped abruptly, as if realizing she'd revealed too much. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths and dangerous implications. Tom studied Nina's face, searching for answers to questions he wasn't sure he was ready to ask. There was something about her that called to him on a level deeper than attraction, something that felt like recognition, like coming home. "I needed to meet you," Tom said finally. "The woman who made my father smile again." Nina's composure cracked, tears gathering in her dark eyes. "Oh, Tom, you shouldn't be here." "But I am here," Tom replied with quiet intensity, "and I need to understand what's happening. My father is a different man, happier than I've ever seen him, and it's because of you, isn't it?" Before Nina could answer, the gallery's back door opened and an elderly black woman emerged, moving slowly with the aid of a carved wooden cane. Tom's breath caught as he saw her face, weathered by time but still beautiful, with eyes that held depths of wisdom and pain. The woman stopped dead when she saw Tom, her cane clattering to the floor as her hand pressed against her heart. "Sweet Jesus," she whispered, her voice trembling with shock and something that might have been grief. "Rosa, what is it?" Nina rushed to the older woman's side, but Rosa's eyes never left Tom's face. "Child," Rosa said, reaching out with a shaking hand to touch Tom's cheek. "Oh, my beautiful child, you look just like him, just like Craig did when he was your age." Tom felt the blood drain from his face. "You knew my father when he was young?" Rosa's laugh was bitter, broken, carrying the weight of decades. "Knew him? Child, I lived with the consequences of knowing Craig Jacob for 28 years. I watched my daughter Elena waste away from loving a man who threw her aside like garbage. The moment she became inconvenient, I held that girl while she cried herself to sleep every night, wondering why she wasn't good enough to keep him." The old woman's voice cracked with emotion, and Tom could see tears gathering in her clouded eyes. "Your father was young then, maybe. 25, still building his empire. Elena was working at that little diner on 5th Street, the one that got torn down for condos. She was so beautiful, so full of life. And Craig was charming when he wanted to be. He could make a woman feel like she was the only person in the world." Nina moved closer to her grandmother, instinctively protective, but Rosa waved her away. "No, child, it's time. Past time. This boy deserves to know what his father did, what we've all been living with." The gallery seemed to spin around Tom as pieces of a puzzle he hadn't even known existed began clicking into place. The way Nina had recognized him instantly, Rosa's obvious familiarity with his father's younger self, the strange sense of recognition that had hit him the moment he saw Nina's profile. "Grandmama, no," Nina pleaded, her voice breaking. "Please don't." "Don't what?" Rosa interrupted, her eyes blazing with decades of suppressed pain. "Don't tell this boy the truth about what his father did? About the woman he left pregnant and alone?" Tom's knees nearly buckled. "Pregnant?" Rosa nodded grimly, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Your father had an affair with my daughter Elena 28 years ago. When she told him she was carrying his child, he disappeared. Never saw her again, never acknowledged what he'd done. Elena died giving birth, and I've been raising her daughter ever since." The world tilted violently around Tom as he looked from Rosa to Nina, seeing the truth written in their identical expressions of pain and love and desperate fear. "Nina," he whispered, understanding flooding through him like ice water. "You're my sister," Nina finished, the word falling between them like a death sentence. "I'm your half-sister, Tom." The gallery fell silent except for the sound of 3 hearts breaking simultaneously. Tom staggered backward, his mind reeling as 28 years of secrets unraveled in the space of a single conversation. "Does he know?" Tom asked, his voice barely audible. "Does my father know who you are?" Nina shook her head, fresh tears streaming down her face. "No, God, no. He has no idea. I didn't even know myself until I saw the family photos on his desk at the cottage. That's when I realized why you looked so familiar to me, why I felt this strange connection." "The cottage," Tom repeated numbly. "He bought you a cottage." "He bought us a cottage," Nina corrected, her voice hollow with despair. "Where we've been playing house like some kind of sick fairy tale, never knowing we share the same blood." Rosa sank into a nearby chair, suddenly looking every one of her 68 years. "I should have told her the truth from the beginning. Should have shown her the pictures, told her about Craig. But I was so angry, so hurt by what he'd done to my Elena. I thought if I just kept quiet, kept Nina away from his world, we could avoid this exact nightmare." Tom felt sick, his stomach churning as the full implications of the situation hit him. His father, the man who had finally found happiness, who had been transformed by love, was unknowingly involved in an incestuous relationship with his own daughter. The cottage, the letters, the passionate declarations of eternal love, all of it was built on a foundation of unknowing sin. "He loves you," Tom said to Nina, his voice cracking with the weight of that terrible truth. "Really loves you. I've never seen him like this before, alive, happy, human. You saved him, Nina. You brought him back from the dead." Nina's sob echoed through the gallery like a physical blow. "And now I have to destroy him." "No," Tom said, quickly, his protective instincts overriding his shock. "We can end this quietly. You can break up with him, make him think you just don't want to be with him anymore. He doesn't have to know the truth." Rosa shook her head grimly. "It's too late for that, child. Look at them together, and you can see it. This isn't some casual affair that can be ended with a polite conversation. This is soul-deep love, the kind that only comes once in a lifetime. Your father will never accept Nina just walking away without a damn good reason." "Then what do we do?" Tom asked desperately. "How do we stop this without destroying everyone involved?" Nina stood suddenly, pacing to the window where she stared out at the busy street without seeing any of it. "There's only one way," she said, quietly. "The truth. We have to tell him the truth." "Nina, no," Rosa protested. "That will kill him, kill both of you." "We're already dead, Grandmama," Nina replied, her voice eerily calm. "We just don't know it yet. Every day we continue this charade. Every moment we pretend this love is pure and beautiful instead of the abomination it really is. We're dying a little more inside." Tom watched Nina's reflection in the window, seeing his father's stubborn determination written in every line of her face. She was right, and they all knew it. The truth would be devastating, would probably destroy his father completely, but the alternative, continuing to live a lie that grew more poisonous with each passing day, was worse. "When?" Tom asked quietly. Nina turned from the window, and Tom was struck again by how much she looked like their father, not just physically, but in the way she carried herself when faced with an impossible decision. "Soon," she said, "before I lose the courage, before I let myself believe for one more second that what we have is anything other than a beautiful, terrible mistake." As Tom left the gallery, his mind spinning with the weight of what he'd learned, he realized that some knowledge was too heavy to bear alone. His father's happiness, Nina's anguish, Rosa's decades of guilt, all of it would soon come crashing down in a revelation that would destroy the only real love Craig Jacob had ever known. The irony was almost unbearable. In trying to protect his father from the truth about his loveless marriage, Tom had instead discovered a truth that would shatter Craig's heart into pieces too small to ever put back together. Chapter 6. Love's Ultimatum. The letter arrived on Tuesday morning, delivered like a death warrant wrapped in cream paper. Craig's hands shook, recognizing Nina's script, dread twisting his stomach before he broke the wax seal bearing a broken heart's imprint. His secretary Margaret had placed it on his desk among the usual correspondence, contracts requiring signatures, reports demanding review, invitations to social events that meant nothing to him. But Nina's letter stood out like a scream in a library, the elegant cream paper and careful penmanship so at odds with the corporate sterility surrounding it. Craig cancelled his 9 a.m. meeting, his 10:30 conference call, and his lunch with potential investors. Nothing mattered except the words written in Nina's careful script, words that he knew would change everything before he even read them. My dearest Craig, by the time you read this, I will have made the most difficult decision of my life. I cannot continue our relationship. What we have built together, our cottage, our dreams, our love, must end. Please don't try to find me or change my mind. This isn't about doubt or fear or the complications of loving a married man. This is about something deeper, something that makes our love impossible in ways I cannot explain. Know that what we shared was the most beautiful experience of my life. You awakened my soul, showed me depths of passion I never knew existed, and loved me with a purity that will forever change how I see the world. But sometimes, love isn't enough. I will carry you in my heart always. Nina. Craig read the letter 3 times before his executive assistant found him 20 minutes later, collapsed in his chair, with tears streaming down his face, and the letter clutched against his chest like a talisman against unbearable pain. Mr. Jacob, Margaret ventured carefully. In 15 years of working for Craig, she had never seen him display any emotions stronger than mild irritation. Should I cancel your appointments? Craig looked up at her with eyes so devastated that Margaret actually stepped backward. She's gone, he whispered, his voice broken. Nina's gone. Within an hour, Craig was standing outside the Flecker Gallery, pounding on the locked door with desperate fists. A closed indefinitely sign hung in the window, and through the glass, Craig could see that the walls had been stripped bare. Every painting, every trace of Nina's presence had vanished as completely as if she had never existed. The neighboring shop owners emerged, drawn by the commotion. They recognized Craig Jacob from newspaper photographs, but this wasn't the composed businessman they'd seen in financial magazines. This was a man unraveling in real time, his expensive suit wrinkled, his perfectly styled hair disheveled, his face streaked with tears he didn't seem to realize he was shedding. She left yesterday, offered Mrs. Chen from the flower shop next door, her voice gentle with sympathy. Packed everything in a truck and drove away. Didn't say where she was going, just that she needed to disappear for a while. Craig turned to the elderly woman with hope blazing in his eyes. Did she say anything else? Anything about coming back? Mrs. Chen shook her head sadly. She was crying, Mr. Jacob, crying like her heart was broken. Whatever happened between you two, it hurt her something fierce. Nina! Craig shouted, his composure finally shattering completely. Nina, please! Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. Don't do this. Neighbors emerged from nearby shops, drawn by the sound of a successful businessman's public breakdown. Craig Jacob, the man who had built an empire through ruthless control, was on his knees in front of a locked door, weeping like a child who had lost everything that mattered. Tom found his father there 2 hours later, still kneeling on the sidewalk, still clutching Nina's letter like a lifeline to sanity. Dad, Tom said softly, kneeling beside Craig and placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Come on, let's get you home. She's gone, Craig repeated, his voice hollow with shock. I don't understand, Tom. Everything was perfect. We were so happy. Why would she leave without explanation? Tom's heart broke as he looked at his father's ravaged face, knowing he held the answer to that question and knowing it would destroy Craig to hear it. The truth burned in Tom's throat like acid, but he swallowed it down. Not here, not like this. I don't know, Dad. Tom lied, helping Craig to his feet. But we'll figure it out. The next 3 weeks were torture for everyone involved. Craig threw himself into finding Nina with the same single-minded determination he'd once applied to hostile takeovers. He hired private investigators, contacted every gallery in the city, even had his lawyers make discreet inquiries about property purchases or lease agreements in Nina's name. But Nina Flecker had vanished as completely as if she had never existed. Isabella watched her husband's destruction with the cold satisfaction of a woman whose suspicions had finally been confirmed. She had known about the affair, of course. Wives always know. The late nights, the distracted conversations, the way Craig's face had begun to show life again after years of emotional death. She had been content to wait and watch, knowing that Craig's infatuation would eventually burn itself out like all the others. Men like Craig Jacob didn't leave their wives for artists and dreamers. They played with them until reality reasserted itself. The sudden disappearance of his mistress was an unexpected gift, one that restored Isabella's position without requiring any messy confrontations or public scenes. She'd already begun planning how to use Craig's vulnerability to her advantage, perhaps a renewal of vows ceremony or a second honeymoon to somewhere romantic where photographers might accidentally capture their rekindled love. But Isabella had underestimated the depth of Craig's transformation. This wasn't a midlife crisis that could be managed with patience and strategic silence. This was the awakening of a man who had been emotionally dead for 20 years, and the loss of what had brought him back to life was destroying him in ways Isabella couldn't have anticipated. Perhaps this is for the best, Isabella said one morning over breakfast, watching Craig push food around his plate without eating. These midlife obsessions rarely end well. Craig's head snapped up, his eyes blazing with a fury that made Isabella step backward. "Don't," he warned, his voice deadly quiet. "Don't you dare talk about her like she was some meaningless fling." "Wasn't she?" Isabella challenged, her own temper flaring. "What else would you call a woman who disappears without warning, leaving you to make a fool of yourself in public?" Craig stood so abruptly that his chair toppled backward. "She was everything," he said, his voice breaking. "She was everything good and pure and beautiful in this world, and I lost her because I was too much of a coward to leave you sooner." The words hung in the air between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Isabella's face went white, then red with rage. "How dare you?" she hissed. "I have been your wife for 20 years, Craig. I have given you my best years, supported your career, maintained your household. You've given me nothing," Craig interrupted, his voice gaining strength with each word. 20 years of cold shoulders and colder conversation. 20 years of sleeping next to a stranger who treats our marriage like a business merger. You want to know why I fell in love with Nina? Because she saw me as a human being instead of a bank account with legs. Isabella slapped him then, her hand connecting with his cheek in a sharp crack that echoed through the dining room. Craig didn't flinch, didn't react at all except to smile, a cold, bitter expression that chilled Isabella to the bone. "I want a divorce," Craig said quietly. "I should have asked for one years ago, but I was too much of a coward. Nina taught me what love could be, and I'll be damned if I'll spend another day pretending this marriage is anything but a prison for both of us." "You'll get nothing," Isabella spat. "The prenup—" "I don't want anything," Craig interrupted. "Keep the house, keep the cars, keep every material thing we've accumulated together. I just want my freedom." Isabella's composure cracked slightly. "This is about that woman, isn't it? You think if you leave me, she'll come back to you." Craig's expression crumbled, all the fight going out of him at once. "No," he whispered. "She made it clear that what we had is over. But I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not, Isabella. Nina showed me who I really am underneath all the cold calculation and emotional numbness. I may have lost her, but I won't lose myself again." 3 days later, Craig Jacob filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting nothing more than his personal belongings and the cottage by the lake, the one place where he had truly lived instead of merely existing. The news sent shockwaves through their social circle. Craig Jacob, the man who had built his reputation on ruthless pragmatism, was throwing away 20 years of marriage for a woman who had disappeared without a trace. The gossips had a field day, but Craig didn't care. He had learned the difference between existing and living, and he would rather die alone as his true self than live another day as the emotional corpse he had been before Nina. Tom watched his father's transformation with a mixture of admiration and agony. The man who emerged from the divorce proceedings was someone Tom barely recognized, rawer, more vulnerable, but also more genuine than the cold businessman who had raised him. Craig had traded his emotional armor for authentic feeling, and while it left him more susceptible to pain, it also made him capable of experiencing joy, hope, and the kind of love that could move mountains. But Tom knew what Craig didn't, that Nina's disappearance wasn't about fear or doubt or the complications of loving a married man. It was about a truth so devastating that it had driven her into exile rather than face the reality of what their love had become. As Craig prepared to start his new life as a divorced man, free to love openly and completely, Tom struggled with the weight of knowledge that could destroy his father's fragile happiness. Should he tell Craig the truth about why Nina had really left? Should he let his father continue believing that their love had been pure and beautiful, just impossible? The answer came to Tom in the middle of a sleepless night, as he lay in bed, listening to his father pace the halls like a restless ghost. Craig deserved to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt, because living a lie, even a beautiful lie, was still a form of death, and Tom's father had already spent too many years as a walking corpse. The truth would set Craig free, even if it destroyed him in the process. And sometimes, Tom realized with wisdom beyond his 18 years, destruction was the only path to genuine redemption. Chapter 7. The Wedding of Souls. 6 months after Nina's disappearance, Craig accomplished the impossible. He found her, not through investigators or lawyers, but through one desperate act of love that proved his complete transformation. Nina had been volunteering at a children's hospital 3 states away, using her art therapy skills to help young cancer patients find hope through creativity. Craig discovered this not through surveillance, but through a painting she had donated to a charity auction, a piece so achingly beautiful and unmistakably hers that it called to him across the miles like a beacon. The confrontation happened in the hospital's art room on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Nina was helping a 7-year-old girl with leukemia paint a picture of her family when she looked up to find Craig standing in the doorway, his heart in his eyes and 6 months of anguish written across his face. "Hello, Nina," he said quietly, and his voice was different, older, wearier, but somehow more alive than it had ever been. Nina's paintbrush fell from nerveless fingers, splattering purple paint across the paper. "Craig," she whispered, and the name was both a prayer and a condemnation. "You two know each other?" asked little Sarah, the girl Nina had been helping. Her bald head was covered by a bright pink scarf, and her eyes held the ancient wisdom that comes to children who have stared death in the face. "Yes, sweetheart," Nina managed, her voice trembling. We used to be friends." "He looks sad," Sarah observed with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Like my daddy when he thinks I'm not watching." Craig knelt beside Sarah's wheelchair, and Nina's heart broke anew at the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to the child. "Sometimes grown-ups get sad when they lose something very important to them." "What did you lose?" Sarah asked. Craig's eyes found Nina's across the table, the other half of my soul. That evening, Nina agreed to have dinner with Craig at a small restaurant near the hospital. They sat across from each other in a corner booth, the air between them crackling with 6 months of unspoken words and desperate longing. "Why did you leave?" Craig asked without preamble. "And don't give me the same explanation you put in that letter. I need the truth, Nina." Nina's hands shook as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. How could she tell him the truth without destroying him? How could she explain that their love, the purest, most beautiful thing either of them had ever experienced, was built on a foundation of unknowing sin? "There are things about my past, about my family, that make our relationship impossible," she said carefully. "I don't care about your past," Craig said fiercely. "I don't care if you were married before, if you have children, if you've done things you're ashamed of. None of it matters, Nina. The only thing that matters is what we have together." Nina closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "You don't understand? Then help me understand," Craig interrupted, reaching across the table to take her hands. "I left Isabella. The divorce was finalized 2 weeks ago. I'm free, Nina. We can be together openly, honestly, the way we always should have been." The words hit Nina like physical blows. He had left his wife. He had blown up his entire life for a love that couldn't exist, for a woman who could never be his in the way he dreamed. "Craig, please," Nina whispered. "You have to let me go." "I can't," Craig said simply. "I tried, Nina. God knows I tried. To forget you, to move on, to accept that what we had was over. But I can't breathe without you. I can't sleep, can't eat, can't function. You're not just the love of my life. You're life itself." Nina looked into his eyes and saw the truth of his words written there. Craig Jacob, the man who had once been emotionally dead, was now so fully alive that losing her was literally killing him. "Marry me," Craig said suddenly, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. "I know it's crazy. I know we barely know each other in some ways, but I also know that what we have transcends time and logic and every rational thought. Marry me, Nina. Let me love you the way you deserve to be loved for the rest of our lives." The ring was perfect. A simple solitaire that caught the restaurant's dim light and threw rainbows across the table. Nina stared at it through her tears, knowing she should say no, knowing she should tell him the truth that would end this beautiful nightmare once and for all. Instead, she whispered, "Yes." The wedding took place 2 weeks later in the garden of Craig's cottage by the lake. It was small and intimate, just a handful of friends, a minister who specialized in non-traditional ceremonies, and Tom, who had agreed to serve as Craig's best man, despite the sick knowledge that ate at his soul like acid. Nina wore her grandmother's wedding dress, a simple ivory gown that had yellowed slightly with age, but still radiated the kind of timeless elegance that couldn't be bought. Rosa had given it to her with tears in her eyes and words of blessing that felt like curses, given what they all knew. Craig wore a simple black suit, but his face glowed with such radiant happiness that he looked like a man who had just discovered the meaning of existence itself. As Nina walked down the petal-strewn aisle toward him, Craig began to cry, not from sadness, but from joy so profound it overwhelmed his ability to contain it. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, but Craig barely heard the words. His entire world had narrowed to Nina's face, radiant with love and sorrow in equal measure. She was so beautiful it hurt to look at her, so perfect that Craig wondered if he was dreaming. The vows they had written were poetry, each word carefully chosen to express the depths of their connection. Craig spoke first, his voice strong despite the tears streaming down his face. "Nina, you came into my life when I had given up on the possibility of true love, true happiness, true connection with another human soul. You didn't just save me, you remade me, transformed me from a walking corpse into a man capable of feeling everything beautiful in this world. I promise to love you beyond death, beyond reason, beyond every obstacle life places in our path. You are my miracle, my salvation, and my greatest blessing." Nina's vows were equally devastating in their beauty and sincerity. "Craig, you taught me that love doesn't just exist in fairy tales and romantic movies. You showed me that two people can find each other across any distance, despite any obstacle, and create something so beautiful it justifies every moment of pain that led them to each other. I promise to be your partner, your lover, your best friend, and your fiercest protector for as long as there is breath in my body." The ring exchange was achingly tender, two people marking each other as permanently belonging to someone who understood their soul. When Craig slipped the wedding band onto Nina's finger, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely complete the task. "By the power vested in me," the minister intoned, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Craig, you may kiss your bride." Craig cupped Nina's face in his hands like she was made of spun glass, looking into her eyes with wonder and adoration and love so pure it took everyone's breath away. "My wife," he whispered, as if testing the words on his tongue. "My husband," Nina replied, and the words were both a joy and a damnation. They moved toward each other slowly, savoring this perfect moment before reality crashed back in around them. Their lips were inches apart, Craig's eyes closing in anticipation of the kiss that would seal their union, when the sound of car doors slamming made everyone turn toward the cottage's driveway. Tom stood frozen as he watched three figures emerge from the car: Rosa, moving slowly with her cane, a middle-aged Hispanic woman he didn't recognize, and Elena Santos, Nina's mother, who was supposed to be dead but was very much alive and staring at the wedding scene with an expression of absolute horror. "Stop!" Tom shouted, his voice cracking with the weight of 6 months of suppressed truth. "Stop the wedding! You can't do this!" The garden fell silent, except for the sound of Nina's sharp intake of breath as she saw her mother, the woman she thought had died in childbirth, standing 30 feet away with tears streaming down her face. "Tom, what?" Craig began, but his son was already running toward them, Rosa and Elena following as quickly as Rosa's age would allow. "Dad," Tom said, his voice breaking as he reached the altar, "there's something you need to know. Something about Nina, about her family, about why this wedding can't happen." Craig's arm tightened protectively around Nina's waist. "Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Nothing matters except—" "She's your daughter," Tom shouted, the words exploding from him like a gunshot. "Nina is your daughter, Dad. Elena Santos is her mother, and you're her father." The silence that followed was deafening. Craig stared at Tom as if he were speaking a foreign language, his mind unable to process what he'd just heard. Nina swayed on her feet, her face draining of all color as she looked from Tom to the woman standing behind him, the mother she'd thought was dead. "That's impossible," Craig whispered. "Nina's mother died in childbirth. Rosa told me—" "I lied," Rosa interrupted, her voice heavy with 28 years of guilt. "Elena didn't die, Craig. She survived, but she was so destroyed by your abandonment that she couldn't bear to raise the child who looked so much like you. She gave Nina to me and disappeared. I told Nina her mother was dead because it seemed kinder than the truth." Elena stepped forward, her face a mask of pain and regret. "I came back a year ago," she said quietly. "I wanted to see my daughter, to try to make amends for abandoning her. That's when Rosa told me about you, about the affair. When we realized what was happening between you and Nina, we knew we had to stop it." Craig's world tilted violently as he looked from Elena to Nina, seeing the resemblance he had been too blind with love to notice before. Nina had his eyes, his stubborn chin, the same way of tilting her head when she was thinking. "No," Craig whispered, backing away from Nina as if she had burst into flames. "No, this isn't possible. I would have known. I would have felt it." But even as he spoke the words, Craig's heart was already breaking with the terrible truth. Every moment of connection he'd felt with Nina, every inexplicable recognition, every sense that they were two halves of the same soul. It hadn't been destiny or cosmic love. It had been blood calling to blood, the unconscious recognition of shared DNA disguised as romantic attraction. Nina collapsed to her knees in her grandmother's wedding dress, keening like a wounded animal as the full horror of the situation crashed over her. She had been in love with her father, had made love to him, had promised to spend her life with him, had been seconds away from sealing that promise with a kiss that would have made their sin complete. The wedding guests scattered like leaves in a hurricane, unable to witness the complete destruction of two people who had loved each other with a purity that made their downfall all the more devastating. Only Tom remained, watching his father and sister, God, his sister, destroy each other with the magnitude of their anguish. As Craig Jacob stood in the ruins of his wedding day, surrounded by the wreckage of the only love that had ever meant anything to him, he finally understood that some truths are too terrible to survive. The woman he had loved beyond reason, beyond sanity, beyond every law of God and man, was his own daughter, and that knowledge would haunt him until the day he died. Chapter 8. The truth that destroys everything. Silence stretched like a chasm after Tom's revelation, broken only by Nina's wedding dress rustling as she swayed. Craig stared at his son with the expression of a man told the son had died, his mind rejecting what he'd heard. The wedding guests, who moments before had been dabbing their eyes at the beauty of Craig and Nina's vows, now stood frozen in horror. Some began backing away, as if the revelation were contagious. Others stood transfixed, unable to look away from the unfolding tragedy. The minister, a kindly man in his 70s who had performed hundreds of ceremonies, had never encountered anything like this in his 40 years of service. "That's impossible," Craig whispered, but even as he spoke, his mind was cataloging evidence he'd been too blind with love to see. The way Nina had seemed familiar from their first meeting. The inexplicable sense of completion he'd felt in her, in presence. The way she'd fit so perfectly in his arms, as if she'd been made to be there. Elena Santos stepped forward, her face ravaged by 28 years of guilt and heartbreak. She was still beautiful despite the lines of sorrow that marked her features, but there was a hardness around her eyes that spoke of dreams deferred and hearts broken beyond repair. Craig felt his world collapse as he saw Nina's eyes looking back at him from her mother's face. The same deep brown, the same way of tilting her head when she was thinking, the same stubborn set of her jaw when she was determined. "It's not impossible." "Craig," Elena said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "It's the truth. Nina is our daughter, born 9 months after you walked out of my life forever. 9 months after you threw money at me and told me to take care of it, like our child was some kind of inconvenience to be disposed of." The guests were fleeing now, unable to witness the complete destruction of what had begun as a celebration of love. Car doors slammed in the distance, engines started, and within minutes the garden was empty except for the immediate family, if they could even call themselves that now. Craig's knees buckled, and only Tom's strong arms kept him from collapsing completely. "Elena," he whispered, her name a prayer and a curse on his lips. "You're supposed to be dead. Rosa said—" "Rosa lied to protect Nina," Elena interrupted, moving closer with the slow deliberation of someone approaching a wounded animal. "Just like I lied when I told you I was on birth control. Just like you lied when you said you loved me and then disappeared the moment things got complicated." The memories came flooding back with brutal clarity. Elena Santos, 20 years old and vibrant as sunlight, working as a waitress at the diner where Craig used to eat lunch during his early days building his company. Their affair had been brief but intense, 6 weeks of stolen moments and desperate passion before Craig's guilt over cheating on his new wife Isabella had driven him to end things abruptly. "You said you were leaving town," Craig said numbly. "You said you'd found a job in California." "I lied," Eleanor replied simply. "I was pregnant and terrified, and when I told you, you looked at me like I was something disgusting you'd scraped off your shoe. You threw money at me and told me to take care of it. So I did, just not the way you expected." Nina had been listening to this exchange with growing horror, her face cycling through expressions of shock, disgust, and devastating comprehension. Now she spoke for the first time since Tom's announcement, her voice a broken whisper that carried clearly in the garden's terrible silence. "The cottage," she said, staring at Craig with eyes that were wide with traumatic realization. "All those. At times we made love in the cottage. All those moments when I felt like I'd found my missing piece. It was because we share the same blood." "Oh God, Craig, we share the same blood." Craig's face crumpled as the full weight of what they'd done crashed over him. Every tender moment, every passionate embrace, every whispered declaration of eternal love, all of it had been unknowing incest. The ultimate perversion of the parent-child bond, disguised as romantic love. The cottage where they'd made love countless times, the bed where they'd planned their future, the very altar where they'd almost sealed their union. All of it was now tainted with a horror so complete it defied comprehension. "I didn't know," Craig gasped, reaching toward Nina with shaking hands that she recoiled from as if they were on fire. "Baby, I swear on my life I didn't know. If I had suspected for even a moment—" "Don't touch me!" Nina screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria as she scrambled backward so violently that she tripped over her wedding dress train and fell hard onto the grass. The ivory fabric that had made her look like an angel now spread around her like broken wings, stained with dirt and tears. "Don't you dare touch me! Don't call me baby! Don't look at me with those eyes that see a lover instead of a daughter!" The sound that escaped Craig's throat was barely human, a keening wail that spoke of pain beyond the reach of words. Tom had never seen his father cry, had never imagined the composed businessman was capable of such raw, devastating emotion. But now, Craig was on his knees in his wedding suit, sobbing like a child who had lost everything that mattered in the world. Rosa, who had been standing frozen in horrified silence, finally found her voice. "This is my fault," she said, her words carrying the weight of decades of self-recrimination. "I should have told Nina the truth from the beginning, should have shown her your picture, warned her about who you were. But I was so angry, so hurt by what you'd done to Elena that I thought keeping you separate was protection enough." Tom watched the destruction unfold around him with the sick realization that his attempt to prevent this disaster had instead orchestrated it. If he had stayed quiet, if he had let them live in ignorant bliss, they would be married now, happily, committing a sin they didn't know existed. But the truth he'd been so determined to reveal was destroying everyone he loved. "Dad," Tom said softly, approaching Craig like someone might approach a man standing on a ledge. "Dad, we need to get you inside. You're in shock." Craig looked at his son with eyes that had aged 20 years in the space of 10 minutes. "She's your sister," he said wonderingly. "Nina is your sister, and I was going to marry her. I was going to spend my life with her, have children with her. Oh God, what if she had gotten pregnant?" The question hung in the air like a physical presence, and Nina made a sound that was half sob, half retch, as she considered the genetic nightmare that could have resulted from their union. "We used protection," she whispered, as if trying to convince herself. "Always. We couldn't have..." But even as she spoke, Nina's hand went unconsciously to her stomach, and Elena's sharp intake of breath suggested that maternal instinct. had detected something Nina herself hadn't yet realized. "Nina," Elena said carefully, "when was your last period?" The color drained from Nina's face so completely that she looked like a ghost in her ivory wedding dress. I don't... I've been stressed with the wedding planning and moving," and her voice trailed off as the implications crashed over her. Craig made a sound like a wounded animal as he watched his daughter, his daughter, realize she might be carrying his child. The cottage, their perfect love nest where they had celebrated their connection night after night, suddenly seemed like a monument to the most profound violation of natural law imaginable. "I have to go," Nina said suddenly, struggling to her feet and hiking up her wedding dress with shaking hands. "I have to get away from here, away from all of you, away from this nightmare." "Nina, wait!" Craig called after her, but she was already running toward the cottage, her train dragging behind her like a fallen angel's broken wings. Craig started to follow, but Tom caught his arm. "Let her go, Dad. She needs space to process this. I can't just let her run away again," Craig protested, his voice breaking. "She's my daughter, Tom. My daughter, and we've been... "I know what you've been," Tom said firmly, "and that's exactly why you need to let her go. She can't even look at you right now without seeing her lover instead of her father." Elena watched Nina disappear into the cottage with an expression of maternal anguish that cut through everyone present like a blade. "I should go to her," she said. "She needs her mother." "She doesn't even know you're her mother," Rosa pointed out bitterly. "As far as Nina's concerned, you're just another stranger with claims on her DNA." The truth of that statement settled over the group like a shroud. Nina was alone in her horror, unable to turn to the grandmother who had lied to her, the mother who had abandoned her, the father who had unknowingly violated her, or the brother who had orchestrated the revelation that destroyed her world. From inside the cottage came the sound of crashing glass and Nina's anguished sobs. Craig took a step toward the sound, every paternal instinct screaming at him to comfort his child, but the knowledge of what he had done to her, what they had done to each other, rooted him to the spot. 28 years, Craig said hollowly, staring at Elena with haunted eyes. For 28 years, I had a daughter I didn't know existed. And when I finally found her, when I finally felt complete for the first time in my life, it was because I was unknowingly committing the ultimate sin. Elena's composure finally cracked, 28 years of suppressed pain and guilt pouring out in a flood of tears. "I hated you," she sobbed, "for abandoning me, for never trying to find out what happened, for building your perfect life while I struggled to raise the daughter who looked so much like you. It broke my heart every day. But I never wanted this. I never wanted anyone to be hurt like this." The wedding guests had long since fled, unable to witness the complete destruction of what had begun as a celebration of love. Only the family remained, if they could even call themselves that now, standing in the ruins of a dream that had become the worst kind of nightmare. Inside the cottage, Nina's sobs gradually quieted, replaced by an ominous silence that made everyone exchange worried glances. When she finally emerged, she had changed out of her wedding dress into jeans and a simple sweater, her face composed but empty of all emotion. "I'm leaving," she announced, her voice eerily calm. "I'm going somewhere far away where I can pretend this never happened, where I can try to forget that I spent the last year of my life in love with my own father." "Nina, please," Craig begged, his voice cracking with desperation. "We can work through this. We can find a way to..." "To what?" Nina interrupted, her laugh bitter and broken. "To have Sunday dinners where we pretend I didn't used to scream your name in ecstasy. To build a normal father-daughter relationship on the foundation of the most abnormal thing imaginable." Craig flinched as if she had slapped him. But Nina wasn't finished. "You want to know the worst part?" she continued, her voice rising with hysteria. Even knowing the truth, even knowing how sick and wrong it all was, part of me still loves you, not as a father. I don't know how to love you as a father. I still love you the way I always have, and that makes me as much of a monster as you are. With that devastating confession, Nina walked away from the cottage, from her wedding, from the only family she had ever known. Craig watched her go with the expression of a man whose heart had been ripped from his chest while he was still alive to feel every moment of the loss. As Nina's car disappeared down the winding road, Craig Jacob finally understood that some sins are too great to forgive, some truths too terrible to survive. He had found the love of his life and lost his daughter in the same moment, and the weight of that paradox would crush whatever was left of his soul. Chapter 9. When Souls Die. 3 months post-wedding, Craig sat in his empty retreat contemplating a loaded revolver, wondering if the dead feel shame. His father's gun, a relic from generations believing some failures were too complete to survive. Craig studied the cold metal, understanding why his father had locked it away for 40 years. The lakeside sanctuary bore no resemblance to paradise he and Nina had created. Empty bottles cluttered every surface. Whiskey, vodka, anything that might numb the relentless agony of memory. Walls bore scars where Craig had driven his fists through plaster, desperate for physical pain to eclipse emotional devastation. Nina's pristine art studio remained untouched, its windows papered over because Craig couldn't bear the light that once illuminated her paintings. Tom found his father there on a grey Tuesday, unconscious in the leather chair facing the lake, revolver clutched in trembling fingers. Tom carefully removed the weapon, checking the chamber, fully loaded, safety off, one trigger pull from ending the Jacob bloodline forever. "Dad," Tom whispered, shaking Craig's shoulder. "Wake up." Craig's bloodshot eyes opened slowly, struggling to focus. Recognition came gradually, followed by crushing shame. "You shouldn't witness this," Craig slurred, voice hoarse from disuse. "Shouldn't see what I've become." What? A man slowly committing suicide. Tom pulled up a chair, studying his father's ravaged appearance. Craig had lost 30 pounds. His once immaculate presentation replaced by stubble, unwashed hair, and clothes hanging like burial shrouds on his skeletal frame. "I destroyed her," Craig whispered, tears leaking down hollow cheeks. "My own daughter. I corrupted the most beautiful, pure soul because I was too selfish to stay away, too broken to recognize what should have been sacred." Tom had endured variations of this confession dozens of times, each repetition more devastating than the last. His father wasn't mourning a lost lover. He was being consumed by knowledge that he'd committed the ultimate violation against his own child. "Nina made her choices too, Dad," Tom said gently, knowing the words carried no weight. "She didn't. And no, either. You were both victims of circumstances beyond anyone's control." Craig's laugh was bitter, shattered. "Victims? I was 47 years old with the wisdom to ask questions, investigate, protect her instead of seducing her. Instead, I was so starved for love, so desperate for connection, that I took what I wanted without considering consequences. You couldn't have known. I should have known." The explosion cracked Craig's voice. "The moment I saw her, I felt recognition. When we touched, I felt completion. Every instinct screamed she was important, that she mattered in ways I couldn't explain. I thought it was destiny, but it was blood calling to blood. And I was too selfish to listen." Tom watched his father dissolve into racking sobs, feeling the full weight of his own guilt. He could have prevented this catastrophe if he'd revealed the truth earlier, before Nina and Craig's relationship progressed to marriage. None of this devastation would have occurred. "I should have told you sooner," Tom admitted, his voice breaking. "I knew for weeks before the wedding and said nothing. I let you both continue living a lie because I was too cowardly to destroy your happiness." Craig looked at his son with eyes holding no blame, only infinite sadness. You were protecting me, protecting us both. I understand why you waited. Who wants to detonate that kind of bomb? But if I'd spoken earlier, we would have suffered earlier, Craig interrupted. The pain would have been identical, Tom. Only the timing would have differed. They sat in silence, father and son united in shared guilt and helplessness. Outside, autumn painted the lake in gold and crimson, but inside everything remained grey, the light, the air, the hope that either would ever feel whole again. Have you heard from her? Craig asked finally, voice barely audible. Tom shook his head. She's vanished completely. Rosa hasn't heard anything. Elena has no idea where she went. It's like she evaporated from existence. Good, Craig said with fierce conviction. She needs distance from me, from this family, from everything reminding her of what we did. Maybe if she runs far enough, she can forget. Maybe she can build a life where this nightmare never happened. And what about you, Tom asked, planning to forget with that gun's help? Craig's hand moved unconsciously toward where the revolver had been. Some sins are too enormous to live with, Tom. Some knowledge too terrible to carry. Bullshit, Tom said with sudden vehemence. You want to know what's truly sinful? Abandoning your daughter twice. First when she was born, now when she needs you most. Craig's head snapped up, fire flickering in dead eyes for the first time in months. She doesn't need me. She needs to never see me again. She needs her father, Tom insisted. Not her lover, her father. The man who should have been there for 27 years and can still be there for whatever comes next. How can I be her father after what we've done? Craig asked desperately. How can I look at her without remembering how she felt in my arms, how she said my name when we made love? How can she look at me without being reminded of the ultimate betrayal? Tom leaned forward, grasping his father's hands with desperate intensity. Because love doesn't just disappear, Dad. It transforms. The love you felt for Nina was real, just misdirected because you lacked crucial information. But underneath all the romantic confusion was something deeper, something transcending the physical. You recognized her as part of yourself, because she is part of yourself. She's your daughter, your blood, your legacy. Craig pulled away, shaking his head. It's too late. Too much damage has been done. It's only too late if you make it too late, Tom argued. Nina is somewhere suffering just as much as you are, probably blaming herself just as completely. She needs to know her father loves her, not romantically, but with pure, protective love a parent should have for their child. I don't know how to love her that way, Craig whispered. I don't know how to undo 27 years of absence or 6 months of the most profound mistake a human being can make. Tom's voice softened. You learn, Dad. You figure it out one day at a time, one conversation at a time, one act of genuine care at a time. But you can't do any of that dead. Craig stared at the lake where he and Nina had once skipped stones like children, where they'd swum naked under starlight, where they'd planned an impossible future. The memories were poison, but they were also all he had left of her. She might be pregnant, Craig said suddenly, words torn from his deepest pain. At the wedding, when Elena asked about her cycle, the look on Nina's face. What if she's carrying my child, Tom? What if our sin created an innocent life that will bear our mistakes' burden forever? The question hung between them like a death sentence. If Nina was pregnant with Craig's child, the nightmare would extend beyond their generation, creating an innocent victim of their unknowing incest. Then that child will need a grandfather strong enough to love them, despite the circumstances of their conception, Tom said firmly. A grandfather who doesn't abandon family when things get complicated. Craig closed his eyes, and for the first time in months, Tom saw something other than despair cross his father's features. It might have been determination, responsibility, or the faintest glimmer of hope that redemption remained possible. I need to find her, Craig said quietly. Not to resume what we had. That's dead and buried. But to be what I should have been. From the beginning. Her father. Tom felt relief, tears streaming down his face. Yes, Dad. You need to find her. And I'm going to help you. As father and son sat together in Craig's paradise ruins, planning their search for the daughter who had been lost and found and lost again, neither could imagine the devastating news that would reach them within the week, news that would transform their guilt into something far more complex and their love into something deeper than either had thought possible. But for the first time in 3 months, Craig Jacob was thinking about living instead of dying, about healing instead of destruction, about love instead of loss. The revolver lay forgotten in Tom's jacket pocket, its purpose transformed from ending pain to protecting the future they were determined to build together. Chapter 10. Love's Ultimate Victory. 2 years since the wedding destroyed everything, Craig Jacob was dying. Not from bullets he'd considered countless times, but from stress, cardiomyopathy, literally a broken heart. The irony struck him as he lay surrounded by machines monitoring his failing organ that had learned to love too late and too completely. Tom maintained vigil beside his father's bed, holding watch as he had for 3 days since Craig collapsed in his office. The doctors had been brutally honest. Craig's heart was surrendering, worn down by months of guilt, grief, and emotional devastation that could kill as surely as any disease. "Have you found her?" Craig asked weakly, voice barely above a whisper. Tom squeezed his father's hand. "The investigators think they have a lead. There's a woman matching Nina's description working at a refugee mission in New Mexico, helping undocumented immigrants. It fits her pattern. She always gravitated toward helping people who had lost everything." Craig's eyes fluttered closed and Tom thought he'd slipped back into unconsciousness. But then Craig spoke, words so soft Tom had to lean close to hear them. "I'm not going to survive this time, am I?" Tom wanted to lie, offer false hope and empty reassurances. But his father deserved truth, especially now. "No, Dad, I don't think you will." Craig nodded slightly, accepting the verdict with quiet dignity he'd shown throughout his slow dissolution. "I need to see her, Tom, before the end. I need to tell her that what we had wasn't wrong. It was the purest thing either of us ever experienced, and the world was wrong to call it sin." "Dad, I mean it," Craig interrupted with more strength than he'd shown in days. "What we felt for each other transcended every boundary, every law, every convention society uses to define acceptable love. We found something sacred, Tom, and the fact that we shared blood doesn't make it less beautiful. It makes it more complex, more tragic, but not less real." Tom stared at his father in shock. After 2 years of self-recrimination and suicidal guilt, Craig had somehow found a way to see their love as something other than an abomination. "How can you say that?" Tom asked. "After everything that happened, after all the pain?" "Because I'm dying," Craig said simply. "And when you're dying, you see things clearly for the first time. Nina and I loved each other completely, honestly, with every fiber of our beings. The fact that we didn't know we were related doesn't diminish that love. It just means we were victims of circumstance rather than perpetrators of intentional evil." The hospital room fell silent, except for steady monitor beeping and Craig's labored breathing. Tom watched his father's face, seeing something he hadn't witnessed in 2 years. Peace. "I called her," Tom said suddenly. "The mission in New Mexico. I told them it was a family emergency, that her father was dying and needed to see her." Craig's eyes snapped open. "You what?" "She's on her way, Dad. She'll be here tonight." Craig tried to sit up, panic and hope warring on his ravaged face. "She can't see me like this. She can't. She needs to see you," Tom said firmly. "You both need this closure, this chance to say what should have been said 2 years ago. That Evening, as autumn rain streaked hospital windows, Nina Flecker walked into Craig's room and broke both their hearts anew. She was thinner than before, her face marked by 2 years of exile and suffering, but still achingly beautiful. She moved carefully, as if every step caused pain, and Tom realized with shock that she was protecting her abdomen. "Oh, God," Nina whispered, seeing Craig's condition. "You're really dying." Craig tried to speak, but found himself overwhelmed by emotion. Here was his daughter, his lost love, his greatest joy and deepest regret embodied in one perfect, impossible person. "I'm so sorry," Craig managed finally. "For everything. For not knowing who you were, for letting it progress so far, for destroying your life." "Stop," Nina interrupted, moving closer to his bedside. "Just stop, Craig. We were both victims of fate's cruel joke. Neither of us chose to fall in love with our own blood." She sat carefully in the chair beside his bed, and Craig could see the slight swell of her stomach beneath her loose sweater. His heart clenched with mixture of joy and terror. "You're pregnant," he said, not a question. Nina's hand moved protectively to her belly. 3 months along. I found out a week after I left, and I've been trying to decide what to do ever since." "Is it?" Craig couldn't finish the question. "No," Nina said quickly, reading the fear in his eyes. "It's not yours, Craig. I met someone at the mission, a doctor who volunteers there. His name is David, and he's kind and patient, and he knows everything about our situation. He's the father." Craig felt relief so profound it was almost painful. "Thank God. I couldn't bear the thought that our mistake might have created—" "It wouldn't have been a mistake," Nina said fiercely. "Any child we created would have been a product of love, even if that love was complicated by circumstances we couldn't control." Craig stared at his daughter in amazement. Like him, she had somehow found a way to see their relationship as something other than a sin to be ashamed of. "I've thought about us every day for 2 years," Nina continued, her voice growing stronger. "About what we had, what we lost, what we might have been if the world had been different. And I've realized something, Craig. What we felt for each other was real. It was the most real thing either of us ever experienced." "Nina, let me finish," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I loved you with everything I had. Not because you were my father. I didn't know that. I loved you because you saw me, really saw me, in a way no one else ever had. You made me feel beautiful and valued and cherished. That love was pure, Craig." Even if the circumstances were complicated, Craig reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. "I loved you the same way, with my whole heart, my whole soul. And knowing you're my daughter doesn't make that love less real. It just changes what it means." They sat together in growing darkness, father and daughter holding hands across the wreckage of their impossible love story. Outside, rain continued, falling, washing the world clean in preparation for whatever came next. "I forgive you," Nina said suddenly, "for not being there when I was born, for not knowing I existed, for loving me the wrong way, but for all the right reasons. I forgive you, and I need you to forgive yourself." Craig felt something break open in his chest, not his failing heart, but the wall of guilt he'd built around it. "I forgive you too," he whispered, "for being so beautiful, so perfect, so easy, to love that I couldn't help myself, for making me feel alive when I'd been dead for 20 years. "Will you do something for me?" Nina asked, voice barely audible. "Anything. Will you be my father now, in whatever time we have left? Not my lover, not the man I was going to marry, but the father I never got to have." Craig's answer was a sob from the deepest part of his soul. "Yes, baby. Yes, I'll be your father. I'll try to love you the way I should have from the beginning." Nina leaned forward and kissed Craig's forehead, not with passion, but with tender reverence. A daughter shows her dying father. "I love you, Daddy," she whispered, and the word transformed everything between them. "I love you too, sweetheart," Craig replied, And for the first time in his life, he understood what paternal love really meant. They talked through the night about Nina's childhood, about the grandmother who had raised her with stories of a father who was both hero and villain, about dreams they'd both harbored for different kinds of lives. As dawn broke over the hospital, Craig felt something he hadn't experienced since the wedding: complete peace. "I'm not afraid to die now," he told Nina as morning light painted the room gold. "I found you. I got to love you, even if it was the wrong way at first. I got to be your father, even if only for one night." Nina held his hand as Craig Jacob took his final breath, her tears falling like rain as she realized that love, real love, never truly dies. It transforms, finding new ways to express itself, even facing impossible circumstances. At Craig's funeral 3 days later, Nina stood beside Tom at the graveside, united in grief and understanding that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Their father had learned to love completely, passionately, and ultimately correctly. His death was not an ending, but a transformation. From wrong love to right love, from guilt to forgiveness, from despair to victory that transcended even death itself. 6 months later, Nina gave birth to a daughter she named Grace Craig. Grace, for the forgiveness that had healed them all, and Craig for the father who had taught her that love, in all its forms, was the only thing that truly mattered. As she held her daughter for the first time, Nina whispered a promise that her child would know from the beginning that she was loved, that she mattered, that she would never have to search for a father's approval because it would be given freely and completely from the moment she drew breath. Tom stood beside his sister in the hospital room, marveling at the miracle of new life born from such profound tragedy's ashes. Their story hadn't ended with their father's death. It had transformed into something deeper, more meaningful than either could have imagined. Nina had created a masterpiece in her final painting, Love Beyond Law, showing two souls reaching for each other across an impossible divide, their love lighting up the darkness. It hung in the children's hospital where she now worked, inspiring others who faced impossible choices and insurmountable odds. Love had won, not in the way they'd originally hoped, but in the only way that truly mattered, completely, unconditionally, and forever. Craig Jacob had learned that the heart's capacity for love knows no boundaries, and even when that love takes wrong turns, it can find its way back to truth. In the end, that was his greatest victory, not the empire he'd built or the wealth he'd accumulated, but the love he'd learned to give correctly, purely, and eternally.